Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to Just Plain Theology from Rome, Sweet Rome, a program offered by Natalia Yuzian on location in Rome. Hello, Natalia. It's good to hear from you again.
Bob, how are you?
Good. How's everything in Rome today?
Well, I was walking home today on my way back from school, and what a there's a full moon rising up over Rome. It was just beautiful. The weather's gotten a little more mild. It's been a little chilly for Italians this far south anyway. And it was just beautiful. It was like this luminous pearl set in some kind of a sapphire-colored velvet. The sky it was just perfect. The coloring and everything was absolutely beautiful today. Just beautiful.
Yeah, because it's 8 o'clock there at night, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Connecticut. What a difference.
What a difference. And I bet it's cold there now.
Yeah, it's getting pretty cold. We had a little snow last night, not much, just a little bit.
Oh, did you? Oh, I missed the snow.
Just to tease us a little bit.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about today on, what do we call it? Just Plain Theology.
Right. We can start with Our Lady of Guadalupe. This is a big feast today in the Americas anyway. Here amongst the Italians themselves, there's not going to be much allusion to it, but for the Americans there is, of course, north, central, south. In fact, one of my professors, Father Luke Buckles, he teaches a class on the Trinity, and he made a point of speaking about Our Lady and about the tilma and the miracle of the whole thing, the apparition, and what that tilma, it's interesting how that tilma could speak to these people the way no missionary could about Christ and about his divinity and about her as the mother of God and all of that. From everything that was on the tilma, it's amazing. If you go to, there's the website I think it's in Wisconsin, of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and they've got a lot of information in the fact sheet about that. And that's one of the points they make, is how eloquently that image and the iconography there spoke to the people. It's the fact that it even exists. We were just chatting about that. Is incredible. All these hundreds of years later, there it is, still there. They've had people that they asked to weave cloth of the same material. Didn't last but 30 years. This has been around all this time. The colors the colors that you see in the tilma that were miraculously put on there was nothing that would have been available naturally to the people then. And even he said, and this is interesting that Father Buckles had mentioned, he said that in one study, and we can find a reference to this, that'd be great, but I'm not sure where it is. But he said there was one study where there was a microscopic analysis on a part of the tilma where there is this color, but it seems that the color has not saturated the fibers, the cloth in any way, the individual fibers, as what you would see if you were to dye cloth. It seems to somehow be hovering or floating above it. I hadn't heard that before. It's fascinating stuff. And it seems, and another point he made, the more we investigate this scientifically, the more questions are brought up about this miracle, all of it, not just tilma, but everything surrounding it. But the iconography itself, also, like who would have thought to have done this? What do I mean by that is, for example, on the tilma, you have the symbol for divinity. It's actually a cross, and it's right over her womb, and that is the only one on that tilma, and it's right there. Clearly she's with child. You can see by other parts of the iconography, like there's a black belt that she's wearing that would have been indicative of a woman who's carrying a child. But she, in her posture, is clearly shown to be human and not divine. And yet you have this symbol for divinity right over her womb, and it's the only one on that tilma, and it's right over where the baby would be. Incredible.
Well, there's a beautiful story about it. It says here, its tradition is long-standing and constant, like you were saying, and in sources both oral and written, Indian and Spanish, the account is unwavering. The Blessed Virgin appeared on Saturday, December 9th, 1531, to a 55-year-old neophyte named Juan Diego, who was hurrying down Tepeyac Hill to hear Mass in Mexico City. She sent him to Bishop Zumarraga to have a temple built where she stood. She was at the same place that evening and Sunday evening to get the bishop's answer. The bishop did not immediately believe the messenger, had him cross-examined and watched, and he finally told him to ask the lady who said she was the mother of the true God for a sign, and the neophyte agreed readily to ask for a sign desired, and the bishop released him. So Juan was occupied all Monday with Bernardino, an uncle who was dying of fever. Indian medicine had failed, and Bernardino seemed at death's door. Well, at daybreak on Tuesday, December 12th, 1531, Juan ran to the nearby St. James Convent for a priest. To avoid the apparition and the untimely message to the bishop, he slipped round where the well chapel now stands, but the Blessed Virgin crossed down to meet him and said, "What road is this thou takest, son?" A tender dialogue ensued. She reassured Juan about his uncle, to whom she also briefly appeared and instantly cured. Calling herself Holy Mary of Guadalupe, she told Juan to return to the bishop. He asked Mary for the sign that he required, and she told him to go to the rocks and gather roses, and Juan knew it was neither the time nor the place for roses, but he went and found them, gathering many into the lap of his tilma, a long cloak or wrapper used by Mexican Indians. So there's the tilma. Anybody had never heard of a tilma before, a long cloak or wrapper used by Mexican Indians. He came back. The Holy Mother offered the sign to the bishop. The Holy Mother rearranged the roses and told him to keep them untouched and unseen until he reached the bishop. When he met with Zumagara, Juan offered the sign to the bishop. As he unfolded his cloak, the roses, fresh and wet with dew, fell out. Juan was startled to see the bishop and his attendants kneeling before him. The life-size figure of the Virgin Mother, just as Juan had described her, was glowing on the tilma. The picture was venerated, guarded in the bishop's chapel, and soon after carried in possession to the preliminary shrine. Now, that's quite a miracle.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is.
It talks about the material. It says the coarsely woven material of the tilma, which bears the picture, is as thin, as open, as poor sacking. It's made of vegetable fiber, probably maguey. It consists of 2 strips about 70 inches long by 18 wide, held together by weak stitching and so on. But interesting, huh?
Interesting, yeah, because that material, you would imagine vegetable, it would be so fragile. Like I said, they've had other people make material out of that. Make some kind of cloth out of that same material, and in 30 years it's been disintegrating. And so for all these centuries, now you could say maybe now we have the ability to keep that from deteriorating, from corrupting, but this wouldn't have been the case a few hundred years ago. So the fact that it lasted long enough to be able to be preserved in a way we can now is itself, also is miraculous. Amazing story. But then also how many conversions happened from that point on, millions and millions in a very short period of time. There was never anything like that prior to this apparition. So it really is an incredible story. The conversions, talk about evangelization. She does far more than the rest of us could do. But really with the imagery, being able to speak on the level of symbols, it moved them in a way that words couldn't, because it spoke in their language.
It was Benedict XVI who decreed that Our Lady of Guadalupe should be the national patron of Mexico and made 12th of December, today, a holiday of obligation with an octave, and offered a special mass and office.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
So your professor gave an interesting little story then about that, about those colors.
Right. Yeah, we just gave us a little bit this morning, and it was just nice because most of the students in the class, well, I'd say the majority are Americans, so it's a feast that Latin Rite Catholics in the Americas are, very familiar with, but here not so much because it was an apparition in the Americas and all that, but yeah, so that was nice for everyone to hear.
Now, I know we talked about it before we went on the air. Now, did you mention that since we've been on the air about how those colors that we see there were not even able to be produced in those days?
Yeah, that's what he was saying, that the colors that you see on the tilma was nothing that would have come from the natural resources that the people then would have had to paint anything at that point. And of course there were no synthetics, so the colors themselves are highly unusual for that reason. But then he also mentioned, again, I wish I could find cite this somewhere, but the study that he saw and read about was that there was an investigation of the cloth itself, a small portion of the cloth, where the color was, and that it was not saturating the fibers as would have been if it were dyed, if it had been painted on, because it would normally have something to it, And he said instead it looks as though it's somehow hovering at that level, the microscopic level, looking at it. So that's fascinating. That one I hadn't heard before.
So today's the day.
Wonderful
day.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep. And it's actually timely for me. I was reflecting on this because this week I'm giving a presentation for a seminar I have at school on the complementarity of men and women, and thinking about the Mother of God and how she's held up as the reference point. She's the model for women, and I've just been thinking a lot about what this means of this complementarity. A lot has been written on it since John Paul II's written his between the Theology of the Body and on the dignity of women, and there was a letter to women that he wrote, and in the book Love and Responsibility, which predates all of that. And I really liked the letter from the CDF called, it's the letter to the Bishop of the Catholic Church on the collaboration of men and women in the church and in the world. That's the title. And that was approved by John Paul II in May 31st, 2004. So it was just about a year before he died. And, of course, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger then, who had become, of course, Benedict XVI, was a prefect at the time. And in the title itself was interesting to me in light of some of the research I've been doing because it spoke on the collaboration. A lot of the writings you see now on the complementarity of men and women always start, much of it will go back to the Genesis accounts and the accounts of the creation of man as such, man as in terms of human being, and how we are human beings, is either male or female. And that we're supposed to, the idea of collaboration, that we see that Adam was given a work to do before Eve came into the picture, right? He was outward looking, and some of this Dr. Deborah Savage talks about. She has very interesting videos about one talk I heard at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Anyway, the orientation of Adam being outward and towards other non-rational beings. But when Eve comes along, there's an orientation on her primarily and first to a person. So there's this part of it in the creation account. And she points out scientific studies, and I've seen some of this also, where you're looking at infants, and the girls and the boys react very differently to things. We're talking, months old. And generally speaking, the girls will look at faces, at persons, at people, and look longer, and boys will look at things and seek to manipulate. And there's an orientation this way in these children. So she points out this fact and how that actually corresponds to what we find in the Genesis account, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, in that account, Adam's given a work, and then he's given this helpmate. And the idea of the helpmate, though, when you think he was doing a work, he was given someone to work with him. Now, part of the work was generation, progeny, and all of that. But that's not the only kind of generation. Of course, that's a fundamental kind. But we also generate culture. And being the only rational material creatures on this earth as body, soul, composites, we have this ability to enjoy the earth and see beauty and create it and participate in this. So the fact that men and women are to work together in this, not just in the fundamental union in a marriage with progeny. Again, this is fundamental, that's primary. But then also in the generation of other things and culture. That could mean intellectual work, that could mean artistic work, all sorts of things. But in all of this literature, we always go back to who the exemplars are. Who are we to look to for the models now in our post-lapsarian state, meaning after the fall, but after the incarnation and the death and resurrection of Christ, and now in the age when we are baptized into the mystical body and partaking of the divine life as Christians. And so now in the order of grace, how is this supposed to look? And, of course, we look to Mary as the exemplar. An interesting thing in this letter on collaboration of men and women and what that's supposed to look like in the church is the way they speak of Mary and how to look at her. The difficulty is when you're talking about this complementarity of men and women, it's great. We talk about it, we can speak about it, that's wonderful. But the collaboration, what is it supposed to look like now? Helen Alvarez is a lawyer and a speaker at many Catholic women's conferences, other events, and she looks at this sometimes from more of a legal perspective, sociological perspective. But even so, this question comes up with her also. What's this supposed to look like? So, for example, if you're someone who's teaching in academia, there's the faculty board meetings. What is this supposed to look like? If you're in a business, how is this collaboration supposed to work in the boardroom or at a manager's meeting or the regional manager's meeting or something like that? How do we do it? How are we supposed to make this work? In looking at Mary, at paragraph 16 in this document, it says, to look at Mary and imitate her does not mean, however, that the church should adopt passivity inspired by outdated conception of femininity, nor does it condemn the church to a dangerous vulnerability in a world where what count above all are domination and power. So in other words, in looking at the woman, you can't go to either extreme where you're supposed to model what you think is right masculine behavior in terms of domination and power. Sometimes the radical secular feminist movement takes this stance. That's wrong. On the other hand, when it talks about an outdated conception of femininity, we're not supposed to look at Mary in the sense of her being completely passive and I don't know how to put it. Passive is usually the word, that comes to mind when you think about this. Now she was obviously very silent, but when it was time to speak, she did. She may not have spoken much, but at Cana, she made a big move, and that got the public ministry going because of her intercession there. So that is interesting. Anyway, the dispositions that they speak of that we're supposed to model as women anyway, that go along with our nature, which is to be oriented to the person in the subjective sense of welcoming the other being that's there, this person as who they are. This idea of listening, of being, welcoming, humility. And again, humility not meaning a kind of self-deprecating stance, humility ultimately just means truth. So it means to actually be rather objective about the reality that you find yourself in, to actually receive what's out there, the reality that you find, and not trying to, in a dominating way, make it be what you want it to be. I mean, yeah, we can have a view of, let's say you're at a board meeting of how you want the future of a company to go, and you try to create that. That's one thing. But at the same time, you have to accept reality as it is and work from there. And I think that's where humility comes in, to be able to see that there is this existing reality out there in spite of you being who you are, or in addition to, but you're part of it, but it's out there. You don't, it's not a construct of your own and from your mind. It's there. So this is part of humility, is just accepting that. Another characteristic would be faithfulness, and then praise, and then also waiting. And that's an interesting one, because I didn't expect to see that one, the waiting. Because, of course, Mary waited. Now, she's also a symbol of Israel, who waited all those centuries for the Messiah. And then she waited all those months for him to be born of her. So in her own person, she's living out what all of Israel had been living out for centuries. The idea of waiting, of patience. And patience is the essence of fortitude, patient endurance, I should say. But that's a big part of it. You need patience to just wait. And that means trusting God as well, that he is in charge and he has a plan, and you're part of it, and your intelligent active participation is to be there. And that's part of what dignity we have in being made in his image and likeness. So that was interesting on the part of the woman, right? On the part of the man, now, this is something that has recently been written about. Bishop Olmsted, the Bishop of Phoenix, has put out, let me see, not recently. I'm trying to look for the date on this. When did he put this out? It's called Into the Breach. September 29th in 2015. He put out this call to battle, as he puts it here, to an apostolic exhortation to Catholic men, who he termed my spiritual sons in the Diocese of Phoenix. It's a great way to start. And it's a call to men to sort of take up arms in the spiritual battle. And he, in terms of complementarity, he speaks about man and woman being complementary, not competitors, and that he doesn't want that misunderstanding to come in. There's enough opposition, in other words. So the difference between a man and a woman is not for opposition or for subordination, but for communion and procreation, always in the image and likeness of God. And now that's in the idea of marriage in terms of procreation. But as I was saying before, generation can mean other things. So let's say in a boardroom, in a faculty meeting, in a teachers union meeting, whatever, you're going to find men and women working together outside of that. That's one way to work together, is to see how can we create this future together, but it has to do with each bringing their gifts. So if a man has this orientation towards objective things, for example, that doesn't mean that both sexes don't have both of these, but it might be more pronounced in one than the other. And of course, individuals, you have to take into consideration that some individuals, some women may be more analytical and objectively oriented than others, and that's fine. But to have the balance there is ideal. But if men have that, but then the women can bring the other side of it too, the subjective and the part of that looks towards persons and people and how things are going to affect them too. You need both perspectives. It's great to have a theory, and it's good to know how that's going to affect the people that will be on whom this will be implemented, if you will. So all this sort of thing has been rolling around in my head the last few days. Now, I thought it would be interesting to get your take on this idea of male and female complementarity in the ministries you've had too, because you must have, most people who are working in the church are working with a lot of women. You have some men's groups that do unbelievably wonderful work, like the Knights of Columbus and all of that. But in a parish setting, there's so many women who work there. Sometimes they tend to outnumber men. So I wonder what your experience has been like.
Well, I don't know. It's never been a problem for me, working with women. I know in the secular world, and I don't know if this applies, but just years ago, when the men were in the secular offices, like they're having a big board meeting, and there's usually maybe just a couple of women there and the higher ups, There's a couple of women and there's, 8 or 10 men. And there never was any really, in so many of these offices, there was no respect for the women. Mm-hmm. In fact, even the language they used and so forth, like they'd be talking about some problem that they had, and they seemed to have reached a loggerhead, and they couldn't make a decision. So one of the guys says, well, I guess we'll have to punt. Do you know what it means to punt?
It's a football term.
Oh, yeah, but most women don't even know that term.
I know. But that's their world, right? And so that's not unexpected, right? But yeah, I see what you're saying, right.
So there was a lot of that. I don't know. It's probably a lot better right now.
Yeah, but, it's when I was still working in the corporate world. There was, and this was with a group of lawyers and paralegals and such. And I actually found that was a very, I think it was because of that particular atmosphere happened to be very professional, so everyone tended to be on their best behavior. But in general, at this point, it was very good. But still, you're going to find aberrations or whatever. But in the church, it's here you're talking about people who are really living out the life of grace, ideally, and so you just wonder how it's going to look. How does it look going forward in a parish council, for example? You have or a ministry of whatever kind, and you have men and women working together. What could help both sexes work with the other? Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, what might each one keep in mind so that you?
Well, it doesn't seem to be as big a problem in the church because the women, like in most cases, far outnumber the men. So it's not
problem there. It's just sheer numbers.
No. But there's such a prejudice, still against women, like the idea of women can't drive like men, And, that whole idea. I mean, it's pretty ingrained as far as I'm concerned. It's got to get better.
Sometimes I think, if there was a funny little video I sent out to some of the students about men's brains and women's brains, and part of this has neuroscience behind it, where the connections between the two hemispheres of a woman's brain, well, there are more connections between the two hemispheres, but in a man's brain, most of the activity is going within each hemisphere rather than the interface of the two. So that there tends to be, there can be a stronger, keener ability to focus on particular things, maybe have some analytical skills in the man. And I'm speaking very broadly and very generally, and also keeping in mind that both sexes will have all of this, right? Just we're talking about a proclivity on a keenness, it's more acute in one or the other. So this, spatial reasoning and analytical skills, and in the woman, because of the interconnection, to be able to see a bigger integral picture, right? But also there's, a sensitivity on the part of the woman, so that they've done tests on hearing, so that in terms of the oral tests, we hear at a finer pitch, and and the decibel level doesn't have to be so high for us to hear. So naturally speaking, physically, we would be aware of a noise. It would sound louder to us than it would for a man at the same decibel level. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yes.
Right. So that now, depending on who's looking at that, one could say, well, that's either they're too sensitive to noise. You say, yeah, you're qualifying it now. You're saying too sensitive, okay? Or does that just mean someone is very much aware? Now, that's a different way of looking at it, using that term.
Right.
Aware. Suddenly you've made it into a positive. Now, it's kind of like the princess and the pea. You know, you make fun of her, but there was a pea underneath all those mattresses, you know. So having an awareness and a sensitivity to something is not necessarily a negative. And when you see that as not a negative, but actually as a gift, you think, well, how can that be used? Now, women, I mean, I felt this myself. You know, you walk into a meeting and you just feel tension immediately, right? And you talk about this with the man in the room, and they go, what are you talking about? You think, okay, you saw an eruption coming, 10 minutes before everybody made it into the room just by some of the people in there. And you didn't know why or what, but you felt something somehow, and you're aware. You pick up on facial features, a tone of voice, the way body language, the way someone's sitting, the way they're twirling a pen, very, very rapidly or something. Something's up. You pick up on all these little things, and men don't always do that, depending on the man, of course. But generally speaking, so some people say, well, that's intuitive, but it may just be that you're picking up all these little pieces of data and somehow incorporating it, and it maybe hasn't been thoroughly processed through, but based on all that's coming in, you're saying something's up. And whereas someone who isn't picking up on all those little things and may not be as aware or sensitive to all that won't see that until later when the actual event happens and there's a heated discussion or whatever. So in
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so then I'm working together. So let's say you're aware of that, right? It's good to get input, maybe from the one who can observe some of those things. And then others who may be able to focus on specifics of, let's say, a detailed plan for, I don't know, a business plan or something. Someone theoretically may be able to work on it better, but may not take into account how that's going to affect others in the concrete, whereas women tend to be better at that practical level, theoretically.
Man, those are terrific studies. I mean, it's like I say that. Is this something fairly recent? I mean, some of these things that are coming out now?
They're doing more and more. I mean, some of them have been dating back 10 years, 15 years. It depends on the study. I'd have to go back and see the one on I think there's one from 2012 I saw. But no, they're more recent than not, because just you have the technology to do it now. You can take PET scans of a brain going on. So when you see activity, when someone's doing some kind of cognitive activity and you can sense when blood is flowing in a particular part of the brain, it indicates that there's activity here or there. Then you can say, well, what can you say? Well, there's activity here and there when the males are doing this and the females are doing this. If they're doing the same thing, you give them the same thing, and maybe that you've got activity in different areas. I mean, it's interesting then, because you're saying, well, the differences between the sexes are not just skin deep. And so the question is then, well, they're not skin deep, but at the same time, we can't say that they have different animating principles, because what animates you is your soul, and we have the same soul. We don't have different souls. There's the soul of a human being, right? Now, this is important, because someone like Edith Stein, Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross, who was martyred at Auschwitz. She was a philosopher, and she wrote about this. And so she saw how important it was to look into these differences. Now, in one of her writings, she said she was so convinced of the differences in men and women that the way that the soul joins with the body is different for men and women, so much so she thought that she wanted to call males and females subspecies. Now that's problematic. You can't do that, because then you're talking about them having different souls, but that isn't the case, because then we would be totally different species, and and the soul is what makes for the specific difference in species. So you can't say that, otherwise they wouldn't be the same. They wouldn't belong to the genus human, the species of human being. We wouldn't be human beings, and male or female would be different. on that level. You can't, so that it doesn't work. However, her insight was that it's that conjunction of the soul with the body. How, there are differences here. So, for example, on the level of physics, we're the same, but when you get to the chemical level, the level of looking at hormones and how that works, and even so chemically, we have different things going on. How our brains function are slightly different, not radically, but different enough so that, and it is complementary, but she saw how deeply these differences go. And so how to speak about that and what kind of methodology will you use to incorporate the scientific data from various disciplines is something that some people are looking at today, because that's, again, you can say we're complementary. Well, how do we talk about it, and how do we study the ways that we are, and how can we incorporate what we find from science with our theological understanding of men and women, and philosophically. Yes, they're distinct areas. Can we integrate them? In some way, so.
Well, that's a whole new thing for me. I mean, I've never had a prejudice against women. Of course, I had 5 daughters, so.
Yeah. Now,
but the thing is to be aware of these gifts and using these gifts, and I mean, I know that the people I've worked with in ministry, like you say, like Dr. Rhonda and Dr. Lorraine and so forth. I mean, I appreciate, the what they do, but I never looked at it that way, in the sense that, they've got some gifts that you don't have, that you should be checking more of these things with them, getting their input on this.
Right, and for women, we've been talking so much about the feminine genius because of John Paul II's writings, and there's the Dr. Deborah Savage, who I mentioned earlier, writes about the masculine genius. She was inspired to do that because he hadn't done it, and so she's going in that direction and seeing. So, what are the gifts that men bring to this? And some are saying that's needed very much because they don't have a whole lot written out there on this right now. With feminine genius, I think with the writings on the women, there, a corrective was needed, and there it is, and so we have it. But we have to see that the differences are gifts to bring, and we're supposed to work together, to co-labor, to collaborate. But why and what are we supposed to do in this collaboration? Ultimately, it's to evangelize, save souls, save the culture. That's what we're supposed to do. That's.
I love it. I love it.
And I think one great example of the male genius, I have to say, whenever I see the Knights of Columbus working in different parishes, it's just wonderful. It really is. I mean, they run breakfast. They get all kinds of things done in the parishes. They do fundraising, and they're just a wonderful, wonderful group. Every time I've encountered them, I've been so edified by them. And so, I mean, you have these great organizations, but they like to do this stuff. They're not writing about themselves and what it is they're doing. But that's a great example of what it is to have of the male genius at work at the parish level, for example. And they work with the women in the parish. Actually, it's a wonderful collaborative effort on that local level. It's really great. I mean, that's one way that it's done. And a lot of them are just, I mean, they're clearly very masculine, but they see their masculinity as following Christ, who's the exemplar for them, Mary for us, and Christ for them. And in this letter that Bishop Olmsted wrote to the men in his diocese, he talks about man as husband and man as father, and the need to appreciate paternity again, because that's a big problem. And I know that's true. I've seen that with kids that I taught confirmation age in the Latin Rite, which at that point was like 8th grade. It was very late. And I don't know that 10%, came from an intact, mother and father in the house. They're both of them biological parents in the house. Many of them, the fathers just were not present. And so there's something there that work needs to be done there. That's for sure. And
my experience with that has been like in the secular world, the men. It's very easy to get a group of men together to play softball and go on to have their tournaments and so forth. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot harder to get the men to do the same thing for the kids. You know what I mean? They're much, what?
Why do you think that is, Bob?
Well, I don't know. But it's a real problem because they will do things for themselves like that, but it's very difficult to do things, for other people. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the same old thing, and actually, like, men have not taken it's completely different. Men are completely different in the secular world than they are in the spiritual world. I mean, they just don't take their places in the spiritual world. Where in the secular world, they're very aggressive.
Yeah. In this letter of Bishop Olmsted, he gives some statistics here. He says today's attack on fatherhood and by extension motherhood is multi-pronged and breathtakingly damaging. So 41% of children are born into unmarried homes in our day. Yeah. An increase of 700% from 1950. When out-of-wedlock birth rate was a mere 6%. So, the children, they're fatherless. Now, it's one thing to not have a father because, let's say, the father died. Mm-hmm. That was not intended by him necessarily. It's different when the father simply abandons the family or just abandoned the woman as soon as he found out she was pregnant and never, this is the thing. And so, you can see how that feeds into women seeking abortion. If they're afraid of being alone, if they're pressured by the boyfriend or a spouse or what have you, they're afraid of losing him, and and they decide to do this. And you can see where this fear of taking the responsibility for what's happened is so problematic.
I just received this book, Into the Breach. I haven't read it yet. I didn't realize all those things that you're talking about that are in there, so I'm going to have to read it right away.
Oh, yeah, no, it's very good. And it's wonderful that Bishop Olmsted, as a spiritual father, addressing his spiritual sons in the diocese, has done it. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful letter, well thought out, beseeching, and he gives them things to do, kind of a battle plan. And a big part of that is prayer, confession. When he talks about being able to do this, saying you can't do it on your own. There's no way. You have to pray. You have to. And when he talks about a regular spiritual life, the way anyone would go to a gym and work out physically, he's asking to do the same thing on a spiritual level.
Right.
It makes sense. You need the grace of God to do it. And where are you going to get it? From the sacramental life, of course, obviously.
And I like the idea that that this book is actually sanctioned by the Knights of Columbus, because there's a need for more spiritual growth there in the Knights of Columbus too. So this is good.
Right. And
we have go ahead.
I was going to say about the spirituality of a men's group. The spirituality of men and women is going to be somewhat different. Now, obviously, we're all receptive as human beings because we receive everything from God, our very being, our rational souls, God's grace, all of that. But I think it seems to me, I remember reading one spiritual writer, I think it says, it was Father Dominic Hoffman, he was a Dominican priest, wonderful books he wrote. But he talked about the different ways that men and women go to God. So men would have more of an act of going out towards God, whereas a woman might adopt a more receptive spiritual pose, if you will. And that's fine, to try and force a kind of spirituality that might be better for. I mean, everyone has to find their own way and what works for them too. But sometimes you might need something a little more active, outward going for the men. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the same for men or for women, and that's fine. It's okay.
That's true.
Right?
We have a very, it's turning out to be a very active men's group now forming at the Missionaries of Holy Apostles here in Cromwell. And so that's going to be very interesting because this is going to be a very aggressive spiritual group. And so
how are you going? How are you going to like when you get together? Do you have an idea of what you'll be doing?
One of the first things that we've done is to do the new Catholicism by Bishop Barron.
Oh yeah.
From Word on Fire, called The Pivotal Players. So I think we've got 12 weeks of that, 12 Saturdays in a row. Mm-hmm. And then I think by the fall we're going to have a retreat just for this group in the spring. And then in the fall, we'll have a regular monthly meeting, and we're going to use something maybe from Bishop Barron, or there's another program that looks very good. It's called That Man Is You.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another one that we're thinking about. But it's going to be, it looks like a really good group. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, yeah, I think that's fantastic.
We have to have more men's groups. There's no question. We got to get excitement going.
Right. And I think, I think to do that, to be aware of what that masculine genius is will help to develop the blueprint for that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like in this letter, there's a theme of spiritual battle throughout this. That isn't necessarily going to resonate as well with a woman. The idea of battling, not that we all do, we all fight.
No.
Obviously, but you can see how this is going to draw men more. But in this, when it gives you this sort of delineated plan of what to do, so pray every day, examine your conscience before going to sleep, go to mass, read the Bible, keep the Sabbath, go to confession monthly, build fraternity with other Catholic men. I think that's the part that's missing a lot.
There are more women doing that than there are men. I can tell you that for sure.
Right. And so when you have the men who are involved in something like a Knights of Columbus, where you have events, you're creating something for the parish. I think it seems to me those men find that wholly satisfying. To do this work. You ask them, you see them hauling stuff all over the parish. And they're physically active with this, and that is they like doing this. They really.
That's necessary too.
Sure it is. And it's great to have both. It's not either or, it's both and there is a collaborative thing. So they're not two groups discreetly working. Yes, you have fraternity, with each other, with, the men and the women have their groups as well. But at the same time, if there isn't any working together, any collaboration, I think then also something's missing. If they're too discreet, it's one thing. Yes, you have. The men's groups and all of that, you need that on a regular basis. But I think coming together sometimes, is also a very good thing. Otherwise, you can be, I don't know, you can get too isolated in your own groups where it's very comfortable around the others. But being with the other sex helps you grow as well, because sometimes you're challenged.
The whole idea of the men's group is to just get them on fire, to give them a relationship with Jesus Christ. And once you have Jesus, then you're going to want to do all these things. You're going to work together with the women and so forth, because it just happens.
You hope so, yeah. Because really, when you have that collaboration, it's really quite beautiful.
So you're actually studying this in a class then?
Yeah, this is, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think this is needed because, like I said, you can have the discrete groups, you can have the men's groups, so maybe we need more of them, okay, but but they exist and you can have them, and you've got women's groups, and that's right. But if they're two separate all the time, and there isn't a sense that each one can talk to each other, I think that's also that I don't know that that's the case in a lot of parishes. I'm just saying, if that were the case, I think that's not the ideal either.
But then you don't really have a good men's group if that's the case. So
you need if you have both, to be able to come together and do work together, I think is a good thing too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you have a good men's group, they want to get together.
Right.
Then there has to be a program in the church too. In the parish.
Yes.
There has to be direction there.
Right.
But anyway, what else is on your mind today?
Let's see. What else is on my mind?
I have something for you here.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of fetal microchimerism? Fetal, F-E-T-A-L, micro, chimerism.
Is
you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. But it sounds like it's a genetic manipulation of an embryo, or trying to develop a human being with some kind of animal. What is?
No, it's nothing like that. Father Don Calloway of Divine Mercy talked about this scientific discovery a couple of years ago, and I've had this paper for a long time. This is a scientific discovery about a mother and a child about a year ago or a few years ago in Washington, D.C. Father Don says biologists have now discovered that when a woman has a child and that child is born or even dies in a miscarriage, or the mother has an abortion, cells of that child will continue to live in the mother's body for the rest of her life. It's a proven scientific fact.
Isn't that amazing? Someone did tell me about that, but I didn't know that was the name for it. But they told me about this study.
You can look it up. You can Google it. Fetal microchimerism. You might want to do that. F-E-T-A-L. M-I-C-R-O. Chimerism is C-H-I-M-E-R-I-S-M.
Wow. Interesting.
That's where I found out a lot about this. When the mother gets sick, the cells of that child will rush to the ailing part of the mother's body and defend and fight for her life.
Wow.
A scientific biological fact. Even if she had a miscarriage or abortion, the more children she has, the more cells are going to come to her aid when she is sick. Motherhood has its blessings.
Isn't it true? Isn't that amazing? Talk about having that more intimate connection in terms of the soul with the body and the woman. I mean, and with her own body and with the child. I mean, no wonder she's to be oriented to another person when you look at this.
All right, now be thinking about Mary and Jesus now.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Father Don says, in the article I read on the subject, it says mothers have a sixth sense on what's wrong with their children. She's not just looking over your shoulder, she's in your shoulder. And it works both ways. We have cells of our mother in us. And that's a proven fact. Now apply this to Jesus and Mary. No wonder she's the terror of demons. No wonder when she busts in on the scene, evil flees, because she's not the only one there. Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you and will continue to be with you. You are a living tabernacle.
Wow.
Not only now, but the incarnation, the Word enters into her body, and after 9 months she gave birth to our Savior. But Jesus remained there, and you know how we were saying that science proves if a mother gets sick, the cells will go to that part of the body and fight for her life. Did you know that the church has never dogmatically ever taught that Mary died like you and I die? We celebrate her assumption, not her resurrection. Her dormition, her falling asleep, her transition into heaven, not dying like we die because we are sinners. The result of sin is death. Mary wasn't a sinner. It makes perfect sense in the light of this biology. How could she die if she has the cells of the God-man still within her? And the church being patterned of this mystery of mercy, mercy upon mercy upon mercy in this woman, how could the church ever die? Jesus said the church would never be overcome, and when Jesus says it, it's true. And the church is patterned off the Immaculata, the Immaculate Conception, Mother of Mercy, Masterpiece of Mercy, Mystery of Mercy, Vessel of Mercy for the world. You can't have the church without Mary. God has done something absolutely amazing for the world in creating this woman and sharing her with us. I want to do that on this day of the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Oh, yeah, it's a beautiful feast.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, think about that.
Mm-hmm. There's a beautiful title of her on the Feast of the Dormition in the Eastern Church, where she's sung to over and over again in the short hymns in the liturgy, the Tropari and the Conda, as the mother of life. Who, she gave birth to life himself. She's the mother of life. At the Dormition, it's sung, because she's brought into new life by life himself, whom she birthed.
By the way, were you ever a fan of Eric Clapton?
I know the music.
Well, he got so deep in addictions that he went to his knees to Mary.
Oh.
And she's the one that helped convert him. And he's written a song that's so beautiful, and you can get it on, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but he does it with Pavarotti.
What's it called?
Eric Clapton and Pavarotti. Can you imagine that? You can go to YouTube, and it's called Holy Mother.
I'll have to look that up.
Holy Mother.
Wow.
And it's just beautiful. And here's Eric Clapton and Pavarotti.
That's funny. Yeah, it's a combination you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, and they actually had a number of Christians in their group later that converted.
Wow.
So God is good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You never know how someone will be reached, and what we'll do. We're all oriented to Him, to the good.
We have that seed. That seed is planted in us. That baptism.
Yeah, for those who've been baptized, it's true, and it lies dormant, but there's always that God's always waiting for the slightest opening. He's always waiting for that.
And what you were talking about, when you were talking about in the breach and about men, the men have to start living their baptism.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's all there. I mean, God has given us all these things.
Right.
And it's like the blueprint there. The church has given us a blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exciting.
It is. I'm excited for this men's group you're going to have with the MSA.
Yeah, it's going to be very good. And we have Jim Tabor, who is kind of leading the way, and Father Skip Thompson. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he'll be great at that.
It's going to be good.
Yes.
So, how about a close for today?
I'll let you. Bob, I would love for you to say a prayer this evening.
All right.
Yeah.
This evening. So, Father in heaven, we just thank you and we praise you and we glorify you and we give you all the honor and glory that you deserve for just you being you. We thank you for this time together with Natalia. We thank you that you give us this beautiful person, the Holy Spirit, who can help us with our words and help us with our ideas and help us with our inspirations. So we thank you and we praise you and we glorify you. We thank Sebastian for his idea of starting this radio station. And things are really starting to happen, and we know it's going to be down the line. It's just going to be a very great thing. So we're so thankful about everything, and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We'll see you next week. Same time, same station.
Same time, same station. Have a wonderful week. God bless you, Bob.
And thank you for your male and female talk today, and it was just beautiful and really inspired me.
Oh, good. Great.
All right?
All right, Bob. God bless you.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.